The Pacific Northwest forest stretched endlessly, its towering trees forming a cathedral of green and gold. Beneath this canopy thrived a world of balance, where every creature, from the smallest insect to the mightiest predator, played its part. At the heart of this wilderness lay the Great Den, a labyrinth of burrows and tunnels where serpents of all kinds coexisted in harmony. The serpents were the silent guardians of the forest floor, their presence a quiet reminder of nature's raw, unyielding power. Among them was the Serpent King, a venerable rattlesnake whose golden scales gleamed even in the dim light of the den. He was a symbol of wisdom and strength, revered not only by his kin, but by all creatures who called the forest home. For generations, the forest had been a sanctuary. The serpents, following their ancient traditions, upheld the balance that sustained this ecosystem. They hunted sparingly, avoided conflict, and respected the rhythms of the earth. The forest, in turn, provided for them its bountiful resources, ensuring their survival. But change was coming. The first sign was the distant hum of machines, a sound foreign to the timeless serenity of the forest. It grew louder each day, a harbinger of destruction. The ground trembled beneath the weight of heavy machinery, and the air grew thick with the acrid scent of oil and smoke. The harmony that had defined the forest for centuries began to fracture. The machines came with men, strangers with hard eyes and rough hands, who cut into the forest as though it were theirs to conquer. They felled trees with ruthless efficiency, reducing towering giants to piles of timber. The creatures of the forest fled in confusion and terror, their homes destroyed in an instant. For the serpents, the invasion was a catastrophe. Their carefully hidden dens were exposed, their hunting grounds decimated. The Serpent King, ever vigilant, led his kin in a desperate effort to adapt, but the onslaught was relentless. The humans came with tools designed to kill, sprays that burned like fire, traps that crushed and maimed, and weapons that spewed death from a distance. The final blow came one fateful evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the forest in hues of orange and red, a single gunshot shattered the air. The Serpent King fell, his golden body coiling in pain before lying still. His death marked the end of an era, leaving the serpents leaderless and the forest on the brink of collapse. In the days following the Serpent King's death, the Great Den was a place of mourning. The serpents, once vibrant and active, moved with a heavy lethargy. The tunnels that had echoed with life were now silent, filled with the weight of loss. Above ground, the forest bore the scars of the humans' invasion. Fallen trees lay scattered like corpses, their roots jutting into the air like broken limbs. The sound of machinery continued unabated, a reminder of the relentless destruction. Eryx, a young rattlesnake with brilliant green scales, lay coiled in a shadowed corner of the den. He had idolized the Serpent King, often trailing behind him during his patrols and listening intently to his words of wisdom. Now, in the absence of their leader, Eryx felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The elders, though wise, seemed paralyzed by indecision, their age-old traditions offering no answers to this unprecedented threat. Outside the den, the forest teetered on the edge of chaos. Creatures that had once lived in harmony now fought for dwindling resources. Predators ventured into unfamiliar territories, driven by hunger. Even the trees, those silent sentinels of the forest, seemed to weep as their numbers dwindled. The air, once fresh and invigorating, was thick with the smell of decay. Despite the despair, there were murmurs of resistance among the serpents. Whispers of revenge echoed through the tunnels, spoken by those who refused to accept defeat. They spoke of the humans with a venom born of anger and fear, their words carrying the weight of their pain. Yet, for all their talk, no action was taken. The serpents were hunters, not warriors, and the humans were an enemy unlike any they had faced before. Eric's found himself drawn to the surface more and more, watching from the shadows as the humans continued their work. He observed their strange machines, their methods of destruction, and their lack of regard for the life they displaced. He felt a growing anger, a fire that burned brighter with each passing day. But he also felt fear. The humans were powerful, and their tools were deadly. How could the serpents, with their fangs and coils, hope to stand against such a force? In the midst of his turmoil, Eric's often thought of the Serpent King. He remembered the way his golden scales had shone in the sunlight, the authority in his voice, and the wisdom in his eyes. The king had always spoken of balance, of the need to live in harmony with the forest and its creatures. But balance was no longer an option. The humans had tipped the scales, and the serpents would have to fight to survive. As the days turned to weeks, the tension within the den grew. The elders debated endlessly, their voices rising in frustration. Some argued for caution, insisting that the serpents should flee deeper into the forest and wait for the humans to leave. Others called for immediate action, urging their kin to strike back before it was too late. The younger serpents, led by their anger and grief, began to rally around Eric's, looking to him for guidance. Eric's, though reluctant, understood the weight of their expectations. The serpents needed a leader, someone to unite them in their darkest hour. And though he felt unworthy, he knew he could not abandon his kin. The time for mourning had passed. The time for action had come. The forest was no longer the refuge it had once been. The humans had established their base at the forest's edge, a chaotic array of machinery, tents, and roaring fires. The air was tainted with smoke, oil, and the acrid tang of chemical sprays. For the serpents, this was not just an intrusion, it was a declaration of war. Eric slithered through the shadows of the forest floor, his movements silent as he observed the humans from a safe distance. Their camp was sprawling and disorderly, with machines parked haphazardly and supplies strewn across the ground. Yet, there was an undeniable threat in their presence. The humans laughed and shouted as if the forest were theirs to conquer, their ignorance infuriating. Eric's tail coiled tightly beneath him as a fire of rage built within. Behind him, the other serpents waited in the underbrush, their eyes glinting in the dim light. They were a mixed assembly: rattlesnakes, copperheads, cottonmouths, and even a few pit vipers, each bringing their unique venom and skills to the gathering. For the first time, serpents that would typically avoid or even challenge each other were united by a common cause. As Eric's returned to the group, their anticipation was palpable. Whispers spread through the gathering like a ripple in a pond. The younger serpents hissed softly, their excitement mingled with nervous energy. "We're ready," said a large copperhead, with a deep scar across his side. He was Zorak, one of the most vocal proponents of action. His gaze burned with determination. "The humans have taken too much. It's time they learned this forest is not theirs to destroy." Eric's hesitated. The plan they had devised was bold, but dangerous. The serpents would infiltrate the camp under the cover of darkness, striking fear into the humans by sabotaging their supplies and inflicting targeted bites. It was a calculated risk, meant to send a message. The forest would not surrender without a fight. Callista, the elder python, observed him from the shadows. Her presence was steadying, her gaze filled with quiet wisdom. Though she had counseled patience, she knew there was no stopping this course of action. The serpents needed to act. "They must understand the cost of their greed," Eric's finally said, his voice steady. "Tonight, we strike." As the sun set, the forest came alive with the sounds of preparation. The The serpents moved silently through the underbrush, their bodies blending seamlessly with the earth. Each serpent knew their role. Some were to disable machinery by severing wires or clogging gears, while others would deliver venomous warnings to the humans themselves. When darkness fully enveloped the forest, the attack began. The first target was a cluster of fuel tanks near the edge of the camp. A pair of slender coral snakes slithered beneath the tanks, their brightly banded bodies nearly invisible in the gloom. With precise movements, they punctured the hoses, allowing the pungent fuel to spill onto the ground. Elsewhere, Zorak led a group toward the sleeping quarters. The humans lay sprawled in their tents, oblivious to the danger that crept among them. The serpents left their marks, coils slithering across faces, venomous fangs sinking into exposed skin before retreating into the shadows. The camp erupted into chaos. Shouts of alarm echoed through the trees as humans stumbled from their tents, clutching at their wounds. Fires flickered dangerously as fuel pooled around the machines, and the acrid smell of burning rubber filled the air. Amid the pandemonium, Erix watched from the shadows, his body tense with anticipation. The humans' fear was palpable, their once confident movements replaced by frantic scrambling. Yet, as satisfying as the sight was, he knew the battle was far from over. Suddenly, a sharp light cut through the darkness, its beams sweeping across the forest floor. The humans were fighting back. Armed with flashlights, sticks, and sprays, they began searching the underbrush, their voices laced with panic and anger. "They're coming," hissed a young cottonmouth, her body trembling. Eric signaled for the serpents to retreat. They had done enough for one night. As the serpents slipped back into the safety of the forest, the humans' shouts grew fainter. The camp was left in disarray, its inhabitants too preoccupied with their injuries and the destruction to notice the serpents' departure. Back at the great den, the serpents regrouped. Their bodies carried the scents of oil and fire, reminders of the night's events. Though there were no losses, the tension among them was evident. The attack had been a success, but it had also marked the beginning of an inevitable escalation. Erix coiled tightly in his usual corner, his mind racing. The humans had been caught off guard tonight, but they would not remain unprepared. Tomorrow they would come back with greater force, armed with new strategies and deadlier tools. And yet, despite his fears, Erix felt a flicker of pride. For the first time, the serpents had fought back, refusing to bow to the invaders, but the cost of their defiance would soon become clear. The chaos of the first attack spread like wildfire. Stories of venomous serpents striking under the cover of darkness reached nearby towns, planting seeds of fear and anger among the humans. For the forest's inhabitants, however, the attack was a flicker of hope, a sign that the serpents were willing to fight for their home. Erix, now reluctantly recognized as the serpents' leader, understood that their survival depended on unity. They could no longer fight as isolated factions. The serpents would need to rally others to their cause, forging alliances that stretched beyond their kind. Callista proposed the first step, reaching out to the wolves, long-standing allies of the forest. Though wary of serpents, the wolves had suffered greatly from the humans' invasion. Their dens had been uprooted, and their prey had fled to safer grounds. Erix led a delegation to the wolves' territory, their approach cautious and deliberate. The wolf pack's leader, a grizzled alpha named Fenric, greeted the serpents with suspicion. His golden eyes scanned the group, lingering on Erix. After a tense moment, Fenric spoke, his voice low and measured. "You seek an alliance, yet your kind moves in silence. Why should we trust you?" Erix, despite his inexperience, met Fenric's gaze without wavering. He explained the humans' relentless destruction, their disregard for the balance of the forest, and the shared threat they posed to all creatures. Fenric listened, his expression unreadable. Finally, The alpha wolf gave a single nod, his agreement signaling the first major victory for the serpents. Other alliances followed. Birds of prey, driven from their nests, agreed to serve as scouts, their sharp eyes tracking the humans' movements. Insects, stinging wasps and venomous spiders, offered their own deadly arsenal. Even reluctant species like the bears and foxes pledged their support, bound by the shared urgency to protect their home. As these alliances formed, Eryx and Callista worked tirelessly to coordinate their growing forces. Plans were drawn, roles assigned, and the forest itself became a weapon. Ancient pathways were rediscovered, natural traps prepared, and venom stock stored for the battles to come. The forest, once a place of harmony, had become a fortress. The serpent's next strike was far more coordinated. Under the cover of darkness, the coalition of forest creatures moved as one. Wolves prowled the outskirts of the human camp, their low growls sowing fear among the sentries. Birds dived at the humans, their sharp talons ripping through fabric and flesh. Meanwhile, serpents infiltrated deeper, targeting key supplies and machinery. Eryx led a group to sabotage the humans' largest machine, a hulking excavator that had torn through countless trees. Its steel body gleamed under the moonlight, its massive arm poised to strike again. The serpents worked quickly, severing hydraulic lines and chewing through wires. Fuel leaked onto the ground, its pungent scent mixing with the earthy aroma of the forest. The humans, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Their shouts echoed through the camp as they fumbled with flashlights and weapons. But for every serpent they drove back, another took its place. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them. Branches snapped, shadows shifted, and unseen eyes followed their every move. By dawn, the humans' camp was a ruin. Machines lay disabled, supplies destroyed, and morale shattered. Yet the cost was steep. Several serpents and their allies had been lost in the attack, their bodies carried back to the great den in solemn procession. Among the fallen was Zorak, the Copperhead, who had been one of the most vocal advocates for action. Eryx mourned their loss, but knew there was no turning back. The battle had only begun. The humans' response was swift and brutal. Reinforcements arrived, bringing with them new weapons and strategies. They set traps baited with poisoned meat, spread toxic chemicals through the forest, and deployed trained dogs to hunt the serpents. The forest suffered under this relentless assault. Streams became tainted, plants withered, and the once vibrant ecosystem began to falter. The humans pushed deeper, their determination fueled by fear and vengeance. Eryx and Callista worked tirelessly to adapt. They relocated the den to a more secluded area, a hidden valley surrounded by dense undergrowth and treacherous terrain. Scouts were sent to monitor the humans' movements, and traps were laid to slow their advance. Despite these efforts, the serpents faced mounting losses. Each death weighed heavily on Eryx, who struggled to maintain morale among his kin. Callista, ever the voice of wisdom, reminded him of the importance of their cause. "The forest lives through us," she said one evening, her voice steady. "If we fall, so does everything we fight for." Eryx nodded, though doubt lingered in his heart. The humans' determination to conquer the forest reached its peak with a massive operation to clear its heart, a sacred grove known to the serpents as the Vale of Ancients. This grove, untouched for centuries, was said to hold the forest's deepest secrets. Eryx and his allies prepared for the ultimate confrontation. The grove was fortified with traps, pits concealed beneath leaves, branches poised to fall, and venom laced across strategic points. Every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest bear, took their place. When the humans arrived, they found themselves walking into a nightmare. Wolves darted from the shadows, striking before vanishing into the underbrush. Birds rained down talons and beaks, blinding and wounding. The serpents struck with deadly precision, their venom sowing panic among the humans. Eryx faced his greatest challenge when the leader of the humans, a man clad in protective gear and armed with a flamethrower, entered the grove. The man moved with confidence, his weapons spewing fire that scorched the earth and sent creatures scattering. Eryx confronted him alone. The rattlesnake coiled, his eyes locked onto his enemy. The man raised his weapon, the flame illuminating his sneering face. But as he prepared to strike, the forest itself seemed to come alive. Branches snapped beneath him, sending him tumbling into a pit filled with venomous serpents. His screams echoed through the grove before falling silent. With their leader gone, the humans faltered. One by one, they retreated, their spirits broken. The forest, though scarred, had prevailed. The victory came at a great cost. The forest bore the wounds of war, trees lay charred, streams ran shallow, and many of its creatures were gone. Among the fallen was Callista, who had sacrificed herself to protect the den during the final battle. Her loss was deeply felt, but her wisdom lived on in those who survived. Eryx emerged as a reluctant but capable leader. Under his guidance, the serpents and their allies began the long process of rebuilding. The forest, resilient as ever, slowly started to heal. Plants regrew, animals returned, and the balance, though fragile, was restored. The humans, now fearful of the forest's wrath, abandoned their plans for development. Stories of venomous serpents and vengeful wolves spread through nearby towns, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of disturbing nature. The forest stood as a testament to resilience. Though scarred, it remained a place of beauty and mystery. Eryx, now older and wiser, watched over the great den with a renewed sense of purpose. He had learned that leadership was not about power, but about protecting those who depended on him. The serpents continued to thrive, their alliance with the other creatures of the forest stronger than ever. Together they ensured that the forest remained a sanctuary for all who called it home. The legend of the serpent's revenge became a whispered warning among humans, a reminder that the wild was not theirs to tame. And as the forest reclaimed its place, its secrets remained safe, guarded by the serpents who had fought to protect it.